Before we can talk anything about large format photography or view camera, you have to know enough basic lighting so you can separate your object from the background so we can see where everything begins and ends. To that end, we're going to go ahead and do a basic lighting setup with just a key and a background light. That way we'll be able to see where your object begins and ends, and we'll be able to analyze your photograph for sharpness and other techniques with a large format camera. So when we photo-light our subject, we're going to start with our key light. The whole point of a key light is to give direction to the subject. So I'll turn on my key light and I'll adjust it. I want it to be relatively contrasty on my subject, and I want it to be relatively close to my subject. That will add the contrast I need. Then I'll go over to my background light, and I'll flip on my background light. One thing I want to do when I adjust my background light is I want to make sure that my background light is not hitting my subject. The only way you can do that is to work with one light at a time and flip off your subject light or your key light. As I look at this, I want to make sure this light is overall and flat. I want a general gradation, but I don't want any real contrast on my background light. I want most of my contrast on my key light. My key light is therefore close to my subject. It'll create a lot of contrast. My background light is generally far away from my background. That will create a little more flat. So therefore, now all I have to do is look and see if I'm maintaining light areas against dark areas against light areas. If I am, then I'm ready to capture my picture, and I can get the separation I need so you can see what I'm shooting. Okay, so now I have my key light that's giving direction to my subject. I have my background light that's giving illumination to my background, but again, most of the contrast is on my subject. You'll notice the only thing that's not in my picture right now is the camera. It's much easier to work your lighting and your setup without the camera than it is with it. So at this point, I'll add my camera, I'll double check my framing, and I'm ready to take my picture. Now that we have our subjects lit the way we need, where everything light in our subject juxtaposes something dark and everything dark juxtaposes something light, we need to calculate the exposure. We can do an incident reading, that is, we read the amount of light falling on the subject, or we can do a reflective reading. In this case, an incident reading is okay, but the problem is our incident reading doesn't take into account that our subject is entirely white. The incident reading would be exactly the same if our subject was entirely black. So in this case, a reflective reading would probably be more accurate. Okay, so if we decide to do a reflective reading, what are we going to do a reflective reading on? We have blacks and we have whites, but we really don't have a middle value. In this case, we could use a gray card, but a gray card probably wouldn't help us that much either. We could also pick a spot in the background that's our middle value, or we could do what's called placing a white. We know that our white value is 2 stops over our middle value, so we could just read the white and increase our exposure by 2 stops. So in that case, that's what I think I'll do. Okay, after I get my exposure of my subject, I have to take into consideration one more factor. I'm using an 8-inch lens, and my bellows is quite a bit longer than 8 inches. So therefore, the light, as it travels from the lens to the ground glass or to the film, is losing intensity. The question is, how much intensity is it losing? Well, that's dictated by the inverse square law. But there's a simple way to plot it. You just measure the bellows. In this case, it would be about 12.5 inches. And I know the length of the lens in inches, which is 8 inches. So I can plot 8 inches versus 12.5 inches on the f-stop scale. And the difference between 8 and 12.5 is about 1.5 stops. So I'll have to add 1.5 stops to my exposure in order to get the correct exposure. Placing the white and figuring out the bellows factor, sometimes the easiest way so you don't have to confuse yourself is just go ahead and dial those figures into your ISO. Meaning, tell the camera you're shooting slower film. If you tell the camera you're shooting slower film, it'll add that extra exposure automatically to your exposure readings. So if I have a 1.5 stop bellows factor, I go from ISO 100 to ISO 32. And if I'm going to add 2 more stops to place a white, I'm going to go from ISO 32 to 16 for one stop, ISO 8 to the other stop. Now all I have to do is take a reflective reading off of a white, and I'm good to go. Okay, so what we're trying to achieve, again, in basic lighting is everything light just opposed to something darker, everything dark just opposed to something lighter. Light against dark, dark against light. Light against dark, dark against light, dark against light, light against dark. If we do that, we have good separation, and anything we take a picture of will reproduce. That's all we're trying to achieve in basic lighting.